My daughter-in-law slid a stack of papers across my own dining room table and said, "It's just a formality. Eleanor, you'll barely notice the difference." I looked at the top page. Durable power of attorney, health and financial. My name typed clean at the top. A blank line waiting for my signature at the bottom. I smiled, picked up the pen she brought, and signed my name exactly the way I sign a guest book at somebody else's wedding. Legible, pleasant, and utterly without legal weight. Because the woman who actually owns this house has a middle initial that appears on every deed, every account, and every piece of identification she has carried for 40 years. And Kayla had never once, in 6 years of marriage to my son, learned what that middle initial was. She took the papers, thanked me, and left 15 minutes later, without finishing her coffee. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I didn't sign that document to fool her. I signed it because the moment I saw it, I already understood exactly what I was looking at. And a woman who spent 32 years running the medical records department of a 400-bed hospital does not panic when she finds a forged instrument sitting in front of her. She documents, she waits, and she builds a file. Part 1. The Quiet Years. My name is Eleanor Voss. I'm 61 years old. For 32 years, I ran health information management at Coastal Regional Medical Center in Savannah, Georgia, the department responsible for making sure every chart, every signature, every authorization form in that hospital was legally sound enough to survive a subpoena. I retired 4 years ago with a pension, a paid-off house on Whitmarsh Lane that my late husband Roland and I bought in 1994, and roughly $410,000 spread across a 403B and 2 CDs I've been quietly adding to since my 30s. Roland passed 9 years ago. Heart, sudden, no warning. The kind of death that leaves you standing in a kitchen holding a coffee mug you don't remember picking up. We had one son, Derek, who was 29 at the time and still finding his footing. He's 38 now. He married Kayla 6 years ago, and for the first 2 years of that marriage, I genuinely liked her. She was quick, funny at dinner, the kind of person who asks a second follow-up question instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. Somewhere around year 3, Derek left a stable job managing inventory for a regional grocery chain to open a craft brewery with 2 college friends. He called it Tidewater Alesh. I gave him $15,000 toward the build-out as a gift, not a loan, because that's what you do for your child when he's finally excited about something. I never asked for it back, and I never expected to. The warning signs started small, the way they always do. By last spring, Tidewater Alesh had missed rent on its taproom twice. Derek mentioned it once at dinner, casual, almost a joke. Cash flow's just weird right now. Every business goes through it. And I let it go because you give your children room to struggle before you assume the worst of them. Kayla stopped coming to our monthly dinners as often, always some excuse about her shift at the dental office where she worked the front desk. When she did come, she developed a habit of asking me questions that seem harmless on their own. Do you still drive at night, Eleanor? Have you thought about downsizing? Wouldn't it be nice to have less to manage at your age? I am 61. I manage a retirement portfolio, a mortgage-free house, and until recently, a very active volunteer scheduled reading to kids at the county library twice a week. I did not need help managing anything, but I noticed the questions were landing at a rhythm. Never 2 visits in a row, always spaced out just enough that no single conversation felt like an interrogation. In June, a letter arrived from a title company I didn't recognize, addressed to me, confirming an appointment I hadn't made. I called the number on the letterhead. The receptionist said the appointment had been scheduled by a family member acting on your behalf, and that they'd need to reschedule since I clearly hadn't been informed. I asked which family member. She said she wasn't able to disclose it over the phone, but that the paperwork listed a Kayla Voss as the point of contact. I did not call Kayla. I called my accountant. Part 2, the first document. His name is Walter Price. He's been doing my taxes since 2009, dry as a legal pad, and he does not say a single reassuring word he hasn't earned a right to say. I told him about the title company, the questions, the pattern. He was quiet for a moment. Eleanor, he said, when's the last time you pulled your own credit report? I hadn't. Not in years. I never needed to. That afternoon I did. Through all 3 bureaus. the way I used to walk junior staff through verifying a chain of custody on a medical record. There it was, sitting in the inquiries section, dated 5 weeks earlier, a hard pull from a regional bank I didn't use, tied to an application for a home equity line of credit against the house on Whitmarsh Lane. I sat at my kitchen table with that printout for a long time. My hands didn't shake. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect a woman my age to fall apart at a moment like this. And I didn't. I felt the same specific, cold clarity I used to feel walking into an audit. I already suspected it was going to turn up something ugly. I drove to the bank myself the next morning, not to Derek, not to Kayla, straight to the branch listed on the credit inquiry. I asked to speak to a manager. A young man named Trevor pulled the file after I explained the situation and showed my identification. He went quiet in that particular way that tells you something before a single word comes out of a person's mouth. "Ma'am," he said, "there's a completed application here for a $95,000 home equity line, secured against the Whitmarsh Lane property. It lists you as the applicant. There's also a power of attorney on file authorizing a Kayla Voss to execute the transaction on your behalf." "I never signed a power of attorney authorizing anything financial," I said. "I signed a document at my own kitchen table 3 weeks ago that my daughter-in-law told me was a formality." "Can I see it?" He printed it. I looked at the signature line. It was not the signature I'd given Kayla that afternoon. It was a much better forgery than that. Smoother, more confident, clearly trace or practice rather than the pleasant, deliberately incomplete version I'd handed over, knowing full well it wouldn't stand up to comparison. Whoever had filed this document had access to an older signature of mine, one from a genuine document, and had copied it with real care, which meant this wasn't the first attempt. It was the second. Somewhere, there was an earlier one that had actually gone through, or one they were still trying to place. I asked Trevor whether the loan had funded. He checked and told me it was pending final underwriting, scheduled to close in 11 days. I asked him to flag the account for suspected fraud and freeze any disbursement immediately. He said he could initiate that, but that a formal fraud affidavit and possibly a police report would speed the process considerably. I told him I'd have both to him within the week. Part 3. What was actually happening? I didn't call Derek that night, either. I called my attorney, a woman named Renata Ashby, who I'd worked alongside for years on hospital compliance matters before she moved into private estate and elder law practice. Renata does not do small talk, which I have always respected in a professional. I told her everything: the forged POA, the fake signature on the HELOC application, the credit inquiry, the odd rhythm of Kayla's visits. "Eleanor," she said, "this is forgery, and it's also financial exploitation of an elder under Georgia law, which carries its own separate criminal exposure on top of the forgery charge, because you're over 60. I need you to not confront anyone yet. I need you to let me build this properly, because if we move too early, they simply claim confusion, yours, not theirs, and suddenly you're the unreliable witness in your own case." "How long?" 2 to 3 weeks if we move fast. I want a forensic document examiner on the signature. I want bank records. I want to know exactly how deep this goes before we surface. I asked her the question I've been avoiding. Does this mean my son is involved? Renata didn't soften it. "I don't know yet. But someone gave whoever forged that first signature access to a document with your real signature on it. That's not a stranger's crime, Eleanor. That's someone who's been in your house." I thought about the folder of old paperwork in my hall closet, insurance forms, a copy of Roland's will, a few old bank documents from years back, all of it in a banker's box Derek had helped me organize the previous winter when I mentioned my filing had gotten messy. He'd spent an entire Saturday afternoon going through it while I made us both lunch. I remembered feeling grateful. I hired a private investigator Renata recommended, a retired sheriff's deputy named Marcus Odom, who talks slowly and misses nothing. I asked him to find out exactly what was going on with Tidewater Alesh, and exactly what Derek and Kayla's finances actually looked like. What he found, 8 days later, stopped me cold. Part 4, the shell. Tidewater Alesh was not simply struggling. It was $214,000 in debt, a mix of failed SBA loan, two max business credit lines, and personal money Derek had already funneled in from a retirement account he'd cashed out early, taking a substantial tax penalty to do it, without ever mentioning that to me. The tap room's lease was 2 months behind. One of his two business partners had already quietly walked away in March, taking his equity share and leaving Derek and the third partner to cover the difference. And 3 weeks before that first forged power of attorney appeared on my dining room table, Kayla had opened an LLC. Its name was Coastal Property Solutions. Its registered agent address was our old family lake cabin up near Lake Oconee, a property that had been in Roland's family for 2 generations and was, at that time, still deeded in my name alone, free and clear, worth somewhere around $340,000 on the open market. Marcus traced the LLC's filing history. It had been formed for one purpose: to serve as the buyer of record in a family sale transaction, a sale that would only require one signature to complete. Because the Whitmarsh Lane HELOC was never actually the end game. It was a test. A trial run to see whether a forged authorization on a lower stakes property could get through underwriting cleanly before they tried the same maneuver on the cabin, an asset with no mortgage sitting on it at all, which meant no bank underwriter would ever be involved to catch the forgery. Just a county clerk's office and a notary. I asked Marcus who the notary was on the cabin transfer documents, which he found already drafted and sitting unfiled in a folder at the county recorder's office, waiting on the HELOC to close first so the paper trail would look cleaner. He gave me a name I didn't recognize. I called the number listed on the state notary registry myself. I have no record of ever notarizing a document for an Eleanor Voss, the woman said, after checking her log twice. My stamp number is correct on what you're describing, but I did not witness that signature. If someone used my seal number without me present, that's a crime on their end too, and I'd like to know about it. I thanked her and told her my attorney would be in touch. That night I sat in my kitchen with Marcus's files spread across the table. The LLC filing, the credit inquiry, the fake notarization, bank statements showing a pattern of transfers from Kayla's checking account to Derek's business account and back again in amounts just small enough to avoid automatic reporting flags. And I let myself feel, for exactly 1 hour, exactly how angry I was. Then I closed the folder, made tea, and went to bed because Renata had told me I needed to be patient for 2 more weeks, and I intended to be. Part 5. Being boring on purpose. Renata's plan had 3 parts, and she walked me through all of them at her office with the same flat clarity she used on every hospital audit we'd ever worked together. First, we filed a fraud affidavit with the bank, which froze the HELOC permanently and flagged the account. Second, she filed a formal complaint with the Georgia Secretary of State's Notary Oversight Division, which opened its own independent investigation into the fraudulent seal use, separate from anything criminal, and moving on its own timeline regardless of what I decided to do next. Third, and most important, she prepared a criminal referral for the Chatham County District Attorney's Office, but told me to hold it until we had one more piece. Proof of intent. In someone's own words, not just paper trails a defense attorney could later argue were misunderstandings or helping Mom with her filing. You need them talking, she said. Get me a recording, and I'll get you a case a jury doesn't need to think twice about. I didn't own any recording equipment more sophisticated than my phone, and Georgia is a one-party consent state, meaning I only needed my own knowledge and permission to record a conversation I was part of. I didn't need Derek or Kayla's consent. Only my own, since I'd be present for whatever was said. So I did something I am not proud of and also do not regret. I started acting exactly as tired and exactly as trusting as they already believed me to be. I let Kayla's next visit run long. I mentioned unprompted that I'd been thinking about simplifying things and that maybe they were right. Maybe it was time to let someone else handle the details. I watched relief cross her face like sun coming out from behind a cloud. I asked, in a small voice I do not usually use, whether the papers I'd signed a few weeks back were the kind of thing that helps if something happens to me. She told me yes, absolutely, and that I didn't need to worry about any of it anymore, that she and Derek had it handled. I recorded every one of those conversations from my phone, sitting face up on the kitchen table between us. Screen dark, microphone live. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, I asked them both to come by to go over the cabin, which was true in the sense that I did want to discuss the cabin, just not in the way they assumed. Kayla arrived already talking, a folder of her own tucked under her arm, clearly prepared to walk me through a simple transfer for tax planning purposes. Derek trailed a step behind her, quieter than I'd seen him in months, the specific quiet of a man doing math in his head instead of talking to the people in the room with him. I let Kayla get about 4 minutes into her pitch. She was good at it, warm, reasonable, full of phrases like just to protect the family, and you deserve to not have a thing about this stuff anymore. Somewhere in there she said, plainly, on a recording that was already running, we already have the LLC set up, Eleanor. Coastal Property Solutions. All we need is your signature on the transfer. And honestly, we could even just use the one from the other paperwork if today doesn't work for you. Nobody at the county is going to compare handwriting that closely. Derek didn't correct her. He looked at the table. I set my phone down, screen up, and pressed stop on the recording, loud enough that the little chime was audible in the quiet kitchen. I'd like to play something back, I said, before we go any further. Part 6, the kitchen table. I want to tell you, I felt triumphant in that moment. I didn't. I felt exactly the way I used to feel walking into a compliance review where I already knew what the outcome would be, steady, clear, and a little sad about what the paperwork was about to prove. I played the recording. Kayla's voice, unmistakable, filling my own kitchen. We could even just use the one from the other paperwork. Nobody at the county is going to compare handwriting that closely. Her face didn't move for a second. Then it did. Not toward guilt, toward calculation. The exact same shift I'd watched cross 100 faces over 32 years of catching falsified records at the hospital. The look of someone recalculating the story, rather than reconsidering the choice. That's not what it sounds like, she said. We were talking about simplifying paperwork you'd already agreed to. I never agreed to anything, I said. I signed a document you told me was a formality, with a signature I gave you on purpose, knowing it wasn't the one on file anywhere. When that didn't work, somebody forged a better one. That forged signature was used on a HELOC application against my house. And notary's seal was used on cabin transfer paperwork by a notary who has never met me in her life and has already filed a complaint of her own. I slid a folder across the table. Bank statements, the credit bureau inquiry, the notary's written statement, the LLC filing for Coastal Property Solutions with Kayla listed as sole managing member. Derek finally looked up. Mom, I didn't know about the notary thing. I swear to God, I didn't know that part. You knew about the money, I said. You knew Tidewater was $200,000 underwater. You knew your wife opened an LLC 3 weeks before that power of attorney showed up on my table. I don't think you forged anything with your own hand, Derek. I think you looked the other way very, very hard, because looking the other way let you believe you weren't really part of it. He didn't have an answer for that. Kayla did. You're really going to do this to your own son over a house he's going to inherit anyway, she said. We were trying to get ahead of things before you needed real help. Everyone does this eventually. Everyone doesn't forge a signature to do it. I said, there's a legitimate version of this conversation, Kayla. It starts with Eleanor. Can we talk about your estate plan? Not with a fake notary seal and a shell company register at a property that isn't yours. I told them both calmly that the fraud affidavit was already filed, that the HELOC was permanently frozen, that the state notary board's investigation was already underway independent of anything I decided next, and that Renata had a criminal referral ready to send to the district attorney's office the moment I gave the word. Am I giving that word today? I said, that's actually still up to both of you for about the next 60 seconds, because I want you to understand exactly what happens next either way. Part 7. What actually happened? I didn't send Renata's referral that day. I want to be honest about why. Not mercy, not entirely. Leverage. I told him I would hold a criminal complaint if, and only if, 3 things happened within 30 days. Full written disclosure of every document that had my name or signature on it. Cooperation with the state notary board's investigation, including a signed statement about how the fake notarization occurred, and a complete, permanent transfer of the cabin's deed back into an irrevocable trust one would control, naming Derek as a future beneficiary only after his 40th birthday, and only if no further financial misconduct occurred in the meantime. Derek agreed within the hour. Kayla did not. Not that day. She left angry. Said I was punishing her for trying to help, and didn't speak to me for 11 days. On day 12, her own attorney called Renata. It turned out that once separated from her husband's fraud exposure and facing her own individual forgery liability under Georgia's Elder Financial Exploitation Statute, a felony carrying real prison exposure given the dollar amount involved. Kayla's calculus changed considerably. She signed a disclosure. She gave a statement to the notary board that confirmed she had, in fact, used a notary seal without the notary present, copying from an old document the woman had notarized for Kayla's aunt years earlier. The notary board revoked nothing, because it turned out the woman whose seal had been misused wasn't even a notary anymore. She let her commission lapse 2 years prior, which meant the notarization had never been valid under any circumstance, a detail that made the fraud even easier to prove and considerably harder for Kayla's attorney to spin as a misunderstanding. The Chatham County District Attorney's Office reviewed Renata's file and, given the amount involved in the pattern premeditation, charged Kayla with forgery in the first degree and financial exploitation of an elder person, both felonies under Georgia law. Her attorney negotiated a plea to a single reduced forgery count. She received 5 years probation, full restitution covering my legal fees and the notary board's investigation costs, and a permanent bar from holding any professional licensure requiring a background check, which ended her ambitions of ever moving from the dental office front desk into the office management role she'd been angling toward for 2 years. Derek was never criminally charged. Renata and I discussed it at length, and in the end I chose not to pursue anything against him personally, in large part because Marcus's investigation genuinely couldn't place him at the actual forgery, only at the decision to look away from what his wife was doing with paperwork he'd helped organize months earlier. That distinction mattered to me more than I expected it to. Tidewater Alice closed for good in September, the debt finally catching up the way it always does once the last available source of quiet money dries up. Derek took a job managing logistics for a regional beverage distributor. Steadier hours, real benefits, nothing glamorous. He and Kayla separated 3 months after the charges were filed and divorced the following spring. The cabin sits in an irrevocable trust now. Clean deed, clear terms, nothing anyone can quietly redirect with a borrowed signature and a lapsed notary seal. Part 8. Regular Sunday. Derek came to dinner alone on a Sunday about 5 months after everything settled. The first time in a long while that felt unforced rather than obligatory. We didn't talk about any of it directly. He asked about my volunteer schedule at the library. I asked about the new job. He mentioned, almost sideways, that he'd started seeing a financial counselor through his company's employee assistance program, on his own, without anyone suggesting it. Near the end of the evening, standing in the doorway with his keys in his hand, he said, "I should have asked you directly, Mom, about the money, about all of it. Instead, I just let her handle asking for me." "Yes," I said, "you should have." "I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "That's a start. It isn't the whole thing yet." He nodded, like he understood the difference, and drove away. I stood in my own doorway for a while after his taillights disappeared, in the house I've owned outright since 1994, with a deed that says exactly what it's always said, and nothing more. 32 years of my career were spent making sure that when someone's name appeared on a document, it meant something real, that the signature could be trusted, that the record could hold up under scrutiny, that nobody's story could get quietly rewritten just because they thought no one was paying close enough attention to notice. Turns out that training was good for more than just a hospital. A signature only means what the person behind it decides to let it mean. Mine still means exactly what it always has.